So we'll talk about Ain Maavirin hamitzvos, but and that's I don't know how I misspelled mitzvos in the source sheet, but bear with me there. Um, but we're going to start by talking about the mitzvah of tefillin. So the Gemara in Menachos says, Tana, we learned kishehu miniach, when you put on your tefillin, miniach shoyad, v'achakach miniach shorosh. Right, we put on our shoyad first, then we put on the shorosh. Ukishu choletz, and when you take them off, choletz shorosh, v'achakach choletz shoyad. And you do the opposite. Right, you take off your shorosh first, and then you take off your shoyad. So the Gemara says, Bishlema, kishu maniach shoyad, v'achakach maniach shorosh. So we understand why you put them on in that order, because that's how it says in the pasuk. Dichsiv ukshartem laos ayadecha. First it says, right, first it mentions the tefillin on your hand, and it says ukshartem, you put them on your hand first. Vahadar, and then only afterwards does the pasuk say v'hayu l'totafos bein einecha. Right, so that's how we understand that shoyad comes before shorosh. But wait a second, ela kishehu choletz. So how do we know you take them off in the opposite order? So Amaraba, Rav Huna Asvara Li, Amar Kra. So Rav Huna says it's a svar from the Kra. V'hayu latotafos bein einecha. Kol zman shebein einecha yehu shtayim. It says v'hayu latotafos, plural, not v'haya latotafos. Right? It's only one shal rosh. So if it's v'hayula totafos, means that the rosh should always be when there's two already in place. So you put it on second, but then you have to take it off first. So there's always two, and you don't take off the shoyad, and the rosh is left by itself. So that's how the Gemara understands the order in which we put on tefillin. That all should make sense. It's pretty straightforward. But here's where we get a little bit of confusion. The Gemara in Yuma. So the Gemara in Yuma, and we're going to start a little bit higher just to sort of give you the context for what we're talking about. This might sound familiar if you have ever looked at the Ketores, right? The part of in the morning and before we start Pesukah de Zimra, right? Some people say Korbanos. As part of that Korbanos is the whole section on Ketores, and in that we read this piece that's from this Gemara. It says, Abaye mesader ma'aracha mishmei de Gemara v'alibet abo Shol. So Abaye sets out this whole seder for how the Kohanim did their avoda, and it's all, this is all learned out, and it's according to Abba Shol. So this is ma'aracha gedol kedomis le'ma'aracha shniya, etc. So we go through the order. Now, what's going to be important for us is when we get down to it says V'dishon mizbech hapnimi kodem lahatavas chamesh neros. So the order says that once you get down to starting to get the neros ready for lighting, that you first have to clean off the inner mizbeach. Okay, that's the order that how Abaye says it. Now, what the Gemara does, though, is it's going to look at each piece of this of this Gemara and say, how do we know that that the steps were in the order that Abaye says they are in? Again, according to Abba Shol. So I'm going to skip down to that piece, and it says V'disha mizbeach panimi kodem la'atavish chomesh neros. My time. Why are we cleaning the inner mizbeach before we get to the getting the menorah, at least the first 5 neros of the menorah done? So Amar Abaye Gemara Gemira Svara Lo Yadana. Abaye says that is the learning, like that's how I learned it, but I don't know the svara behind it. V'Rav Amar Reish Lakish. Rava says no, this is like Reish Lakish to Amar Reish Lakish Ain Maavirin al hamitzvos. We don't pass over a mitzvah when it comes to us. So what does that mean? So in the next few lines of this Gemara, what it basically describes is that, and we'll just go through it quickly, is that when the Kohen was moving through the through the Beis Hamikdash or through the Mishkan, he would first get to the Mizbeach Pnimi before he would get to the Neros. So therefore, if you're going to walk right past it and you're not going to do it, which is a mitzvah to do to clean off the Mizbeach, that would be a problem of Ain Maavirin al mitzvah. So therefore they would clean it off before they got to the Neros, to the menorah and the Neros. Okay, but then so that all is fine, right? But then we have this piece that's a little bit confusing. It says, Amar Rava, Shma mina midaresh lakish, avori dera atotefta asur. So this is a little bit terse, but it says that if you pass over your arm for your totefis, meaning that the shel yad for the shel rosh, that's asur. Ichi avid midara b'totefta. And so what do you do instead? You put on the arm first, and then the shel rosh. Now, what's confusing about this Gemara is really the learning behind it. So let's take a look at Rashi over here. It says Midrash Lakish. We learn from Rish Lakish, Damar Ain Maavirin al hamitzvos, that we can also apply this. At least according to Rashi, it sounds like we're applying this to how we put on tefillin in the morning. And Rashi says, "Avuri da'ara atotefta le'acher tefillin shebezroa," to delay putting on the tefillin of your arm. Bishvil tefillin shel rosh asur, right? Daha bezroa paga tchila, because as you're putting on your tefillin shel rosh, you're going to pass right by the arm, so you're passing it by, and you're not putting it on there. It's Ain Maavirin al mitzvos. That's why we put on the shel yad first and then the shel rosh. Now, clearly what's confusing here is that we just had a Gemara Menachos that said that we learn it from the Pasuk. The Pasuk says, Ukshartem la'os al yedecha v'ayulatotafos beinenecha. So the Pasuk is telling us why we put on the shel yad and then the shel rosh. So why is this Gemara in Yuma telling me that no, we learn it not from the pasuk, but it seems like, at least according to the way Rashi understands this, that we learn it from from this klal of Ain Maavirin al mitzvos. So the Tosfos over here says, Perish Rashi laniach tefillin berosh kodem shenich tefillin shel yad asur dekam ma'avir al mitzvos tefillin shel yad depaga bereisha bezroa kodem shegia lerosh. Now he says, "V'kasha leperish demai iri midaresh lakish typically midama beperika komitz rabba in Menachos." So the Tosfos asks this question and says, "Why are we learning this from Reish Lakish? Learn it from the Gemara." So what do we do with this Gemara if that's the case, right? How does Tosfos understand this Gemara? It must be talking about something else. So he says, "Mefarish Rabbeinu Tam." So Rabbeinu Tam says, "B'shem Rav Hai Gaon, the Iri b'shar shacholitz." He's going to learn this very differently. He says, "B'shar shacholitz tefillin." What we're talking about here is when you are taking off your tefillin, umanich betik, and you put them in your tefillin bag. Shelo ya'aviros and shoyad v'yitnem betik techila v'achakach shorosh lamala. That you don't put your shel yad first, and then you put your shel rosh on top of it. Im kain kishayavu la'nich yipoga b'shel rosh tchila v'yitztarech la'avir all mitzvahs mishum de shel yad yesh la'nich techila. Right? If you put in the shel rosh on top of the shel yad, you're going to grab the shel rosh first, and then you have to be ma'avir all mitzvahs to put it aside to grab your shel yad and put her and actually put that on your arm first. So according to Rav Hai Gaon, this Gemara is simply telling me, how do I take off my tefillin and put them in the bag so that I avoid the situation of Ain Maavirin al mitzvos? It's a little bit difficult to read in the Gemara itself, but clearly we understand what the intention or what motivated him to explain this Gemara differently. But here we're already seeing an application of Ain Maavirin al mitzvos. Now, so let's take a look at what is the source for this Gemara of Reish Lakish, this learning of Reish Lakish. It says Ain Maavirin al hamitzvos. Where does that come from? So it's probably going to be surprising, but we actually learn it from matzos. How does that work? Let's take a look. So the pasuk in Parshas Bo says Ushmartem etz matzos. Right, you have to guard those matzos. כי בעצם היום הזה הוצאתי צבאכם מארץ מצרים ושמרתם את היום הזה לדורסיכם בחוקת עולם. So what this pasuk is talking about is you have to make sure that those matzos don't become chametz, right? That's the ushmartem, that's the guarding of the matzos. However, Rashi on the pasuk says, "Shu shmartem es matzos shelo yavo lidei chimutz," right? Don't become chametz. Mikan amru tibach delush bitzunin. Okay, we're not worried about the matzos, but it says Rabbi Yoshaya Omer, "Autihi kore es hamatzos ella es hamitzvos." So this is a mechilta, and the Medrash in mechilta cites Rabbi Yoshaya that says, don't read it as the matzos, read it as mitzvos, put an extra vav in there. And kederech she'ein machmitzin es a matzos, kach ein machmitzin es a mitzvos. Ela im bali yadecha aseusa miyad. So don't let a mitzvah become chometz, like, become leavened and sit and rise over time. As soon as a mitzvah comes to your hands, do it. Do that mitzvah. That's the source of Ain Maavirin al mitzvahs. A little bit, maybe a little bit surprising, but that seems to be the source for it. Okay. So, a question? No. Okay. So let's take a look. We're going to finish up a little bit on tefillin, and then we're going to look at a couple of other examples of Ain Maavirin al mitzvahs that comes to us and is nogea to us. But the rosh has a question. So this is in the Shut HaRosh. So this is the Shailish and Shuvas of the rosh on Dinei Tefillin. And he says, what happens if Misha bo liyado Tefillin shel rosh kodem shel yad yaviram v'yanich shel yad techila. So what happens if you do, in fact, put your hand in your tefillin bag, and either your hand went to the wrong side, or maybe yesterday you had put your tefillin in the different place than you usually do, but you end up pulling out your shel rosh first and not your shel yad. What do? Right? It's a little bit of a, right? Because if we think about it for a moment, well, on the one hand, Ain Maavirin al mitzvahs, right? We should put it on. But on the other hand, we learned in the Gemara Menachos that the pasuk is telling me that I have to put on the shel yad first, and then I can put on the shel rosh. So what do? What takes precedence? So he says, if you pull out the shel rosh first, before the shel yad, ya'avir v'yanich shel yad techila, no, you have to put it down and pick up the shel yad, even though we say Ain Maavirin al mitzvahs. Mutav sheyavor memasha yeshna seder aposuk. It's better that you put down the shel rosh than to change what the order that the pasuk tells us. So that's our Gemara Menachos, right? So he's going to say, well, wait a second, what about, right, the Gemara we just saw Yuma that says that Reish Lakish says Ain Maavirin al mitzvahs. What about that? Because that's also talking about tefillin. It seems to apply to tefillin. So Amar Rava Shmamina Avuri Deroa Atotefta Asur. He's just quoting the Gemara. So Hachi Perusha B'Shem Rav Hai. And so the Rosh also learns like Rav Hai, and it makes sense. The Rosh was one of the Balet Tosfos, so it makes sense that he's going to learn along that school. Asur la'avir la'agdim lases shel zroa b'tik techila lases alayim. Right, that Gemara is only coming to teach us how you take them off and then put them into your tefillin bag. It's not coming to teach me that that you would put on a shel rosh first if your hand goes to the wrong tefillah. Before the shel yad. So halacha l'maisa, we learn a little bit here too, that if that does happen to you, you don't put on your shel yad first. You put on your shel yad first. You don't put on the shel rosh first, even if it comes to your hand first. Okay, so that is that's Ain Maavirin al mitzvahs as it applies to tefillin. But let's take a look at a very different situation. So in Shulchan Aruch. Sorry, Ori, you have a question?
Yeah, super quickly. So if I open my bag and I don't look inside, it's okay if I just put the tefillin out and then do the shel yad and then shel rosh, or I should not do that either.
that you should. So you don't put right. You don't look inside. You just sort of just take it out, and you have the shell rosh in your hand. Is
Yeah,
that what
so
you're
I just
saying?
put it down and then go and grab the other one. Okay.
Right. Right, exactly. That's exactly the Rush Paskins, and yeah, that seems to be the way. I mean, I've never seen anybody do it differently. I mean, and that seems to be pretty universal psak, is that you don't put on, and I think it's because it's the seder of the pasuk. That's the order that we're supposed to put them in.
But if I just happen to grab the shalyat, then I go ahead and don't put it down, just put it.
Right, right. If you have the shoyad, you put it on. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So I think we saw this when we were looking at Lecha Mishneh way back a few months ago. I think we saw this also, this halacha in Shulchan Aruch and the Mishnah Berurah. So we're going to look at it just from the eyes of Ain Maavirin hamitzvos. But so it says the Mechaber says Botzer shtei kikaros shlemos she'oche shteim biyado. So this is talking about you're making a motzi Friday night, and you pick up your two full loaves of bread. You have to hold them both in your hands. Ubotze tachtona, you cut the bottom one, so you're putting them one on top of the other. You stack them. You cut the bottom one. That's the mechaber. Hagah. The Rama says v'davka belili Shabbos v'biyom haShabbos v'belili Yom Tov botze al ha'elyona. That's by Friday night. The Rama adds that by Shabbos day or by Yontif, you cut the top one first instead of the bottom one. Why is that? This is al pi Kabbalah. That's how you know the order that you do tachtona by night of Shabbos, but by Yontif or by Shabbos day, you cut them. You cut the top one first. So we don't need to go through all the Mishnah Berurahs here. I think, like I said, we saw these before. But let's just take a look at the Mishnah Berurah when he talks about the tachtona and sifkat and hay. So the Rama says you cut the bottom one first on Friday night. So habach tama de Ain Maavirin hamitzvos. How can you cut the bottom one first? The top one is the one that's closest to you. That it's easier to just sort of take the top one and start cutting into it. Why would you? You got to take the top one off, put it aside, and now cut into the bottom one. That's Ain Maavirin hamitzvos. But Taz tikinze, the Taz says, you know what, you're right, but there's an answer here. There's a way forward, right? He comes up with a solution. He says, "V'nohag lahaniach hatachton karav elav yoser mina elyon." He says, what you do is when you pick up the two chalas, the bottom one is a little bit closer to you, like stairs. Like the top one's a little bit 2 or 3 inches, a little bit pushed forward, and this way the tachton's a little closer to you, and you don't run into this problem of Ain Maavirin hamitzvos because the bottom one's already closer to you to begin with. So, another solution the Mishnah Berurah quotes is Olochin ha'elyona b'shas birkas hamotzi. First, you grab the elyona when you make hamotzi. U'manichin osu lamatu botzin aleha. Or you take the top one in birkas hamotzi, then you put it down to the bottom, and then you cut it. In other words, you make a motzi, you swap the two, and then you start cutting. In this way, again, it's just another way to solve that problem of cutting the tachton and be ma'avir the mitzvahs of ma'avir the mitzvah of that first lechem that's in front of you. So clearly there's another application of Ain Maavirin hamitzvos, and I don't know if you've seen this, but that's a common practice that people do, is the tachton becomes just pull closer. Okay, so there's one other, and we have a few minutes left. Let's look at one more example of Ain Maavirin hamitzvos. So in Siman Tov Reish Pei Daled in the Shulchan Aruch. So in Siman in Sif Gimel. So we're talking about the Seder of Kriyas Torah at Hanukkah. So in Sif Gimel, we talk about what happens when Rosh Chodesh falls out either on Shabbos or falls out on during the week. What do we do? Like, what's the order of laning, right? So we're going to skip. We're not looking at the Shabbos piece. We're just going to skip to the middle. It says V'im echal Rosh Chodesh b'chol. So Rosh Chodesh falls out on a weekday, and we're talking about Hanukkah. We're talking about Rosh Chodesh Teves. So motzim shnei sfarim. We take out 2 Sefer Torah, v'koren be'echad shlosha, b'shal Rosh Chodesh. So we lane 3 aliyahs for Rosh Chodesh, ub'sheni korei echad b'shal Chanukah. And then in the second Sefer, we lane 1 for Chanukah. Okay. V'imta chazin v'kara arba b'shal Rosh Chodesh. What happens if you make a mistake? And he lanes all 4 aliyahs for Rosh Chodesh. Im lo hotzu sefer sheni. So if you never took out a second sefer in the beginning, so then ein tzarich likros yoser. You don't have to lane anymore. You can be done after laning for Rosh Chodesh. Aval im hotzu sefer sheni mishum pagamo tzarich likros chamishi b'shal Chanukah. But if you did take out a second sefer, then you have to use it. That'd be a pagam to the sefer Torah if you don't. So then you would actually lane a 5th aliyah for Chanukah. Obviously, that's but that's not, we're not that's not the way you should do it. Now the Ramah adds v'im ta v'hischa likros b'shal Chanukah. What happens if you do the opposite? What if you start laning for Chanukah first, right? So he says tzarich lahafsik. You got to stop. You can't lane Chanukah first. Lahafsik likros b'shal Rosh Chodesh ve'im tzarich levarich al kriyas Rosh Chodesh Ain El. So he says we won't get into that detail of it, but you have to lane Rosh Chodesh first. So if you start to lane Chanukah accidentally, you stop and you switch over to the Rosh Chodesh laning. Okay, let's just catch up to understand what's going on here. So we started by saying that we lane Rosh Chodesh first. So if there's a question on that, the Taz tells us right away why b'shal Rosh Chodesh the Tadar Kodem, right? It's Tadar ve'eno Tadar Kodem. That's why we lane Rosh Chodesh first and not Chanukah first. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so v'afal pi sheyesh b'shal Chanukah p'sumei nisa lesim b'kevin de'akol panim yikra'enu achar kach ken kasva tosfos. So you can't tell me that p'sumei nisa would take precedence over Tadir because we still have p'sumei nisa. You're just doing it second. Okay. Let's skip that Magen Avram and let's come down to this. We're going to look at this Magen Avraham. So when the Ramah says that if you start to lane the wrong way, right? So now you're going against Tadir because you're laning Chanukah first accidentally. So the Magen Avram says, Tzarich lahafsik, you have to stop. Afal gav the Ain Maavirin hamitzvos. But wait a second, what do you mean you have to stop? You're in the middle of laning Chanukah, right? One would think Ain Maavirin hamitzvos. You have Tadir ve'eno Tadir, but you have Ain Maavirin hamitzvos. So which one should take precedence? Maybe you think Ain Maavirin hamitzvos, right? I'm in the middle of it. I have a mitzvah right in front of me of laning for Chanukah. So hacha ma'akvos. Here it actually is a problem to do this. The dami lahakdim tefillin shel rosh l'shel yad, because it's very similar to putting on your shel rosh before your shel yad. That's the Magen Avram, and he's quoting from the Abu Darham that makes that connection that it's very similar, and it's a problem to do it in that way. So according to the Magen Avram, and certainly according to the Ramah, Tadir takes precedence over Ain Maavirin hamitzvos. Now, just to make things a little bit more interesting, let's take a look at the Bir HaGra. The Gra has a little bit of a different take on this. He says he's going on V'im Tov Hachazan, right? He makes the mistake and he starts laning Chanukah before Rosh Chodesh. But the Gemara Megillah says Ein Mashgichin b'Chanukah. When the Gemara is asking the same question, it goes through the Shaklavitaria of this and goes through the same question. It concludes and says Ein Mashgichin b'Chanukah, that we don't. That Chanukah does not become the ikr, does not become the precedence. We can take a look at it real quick. And here, it's in Megillah Daf Chof Tes Amud Beis. But I'll just, because we're only a couple of minutes left. So there's a whole. It starts out by Rosh Chodesh Tevis Shechalios b'Shabbos, etc. Then Rosh Chodesh Tevis Shechalios b'Chol. So it's very similar to the Bechaber, in Shulchan Aruch is really just quoting right from this Gemara. But then the Gemara says, "My havi Allah." So what's the halacha between what comes first, Rosh Chodesh or Chanukah? Rabbi Yosef Amar Ein Mashkichim beRosh Chodesh, veRabba Amar Ein Mashkichim beChanukah veHilchasa Ein Mashkichim beChanukah. Meaning that the conclusion is that the Chanukah doesn't take precedence. So what the Gra is telling us from this Gemara is Ein Mashkichim beChanukah means that forget about, it's not an Ain Maavirin mitzvahs versus Tadir ve'eino Tadir. Chanukah is simply not the Iker. And if it's not the Iker, you have to lane the Rosh Chodesh first. It doesn't even rise to the level of being a mitzvah per se. Maybe it's more minhag, I'm not sure. I don't want to talk out of turn, but it doesn't seem to be on par with the laning for Rosh Chodesh. And therefore, it's not even a problem of Ain Maavirin mitzvahs. It's really a problem of this is the Iker, and this is and it's not even an issue of Tadir versus not Tadir. This is just Rosh Chodesh is the Iker, and that's it. Chanukah we lay, but Chanukah is not the Iker.
Is that kind of a question? Just if it isn't talking about something that's on a mitzvah level, then we are talking then at minhag, or obviously we have much of Masechet Megillah. We're talking about the different leanings. Wouldn't
right.
Wrapping up the Sefer Torah and switching over to rosh, you are ma'avirin into al mitzvah in terms of limud Torah at that point, right? So there is kind of a solid mitzvah right in front of you.
Yeah, I mean, right. So if it's simply a question of like, if you want to go back and say, like from the takana of Ezra of laning, during the week, Mondays and Thursdays. But that doesn't necessarily tell us what we have to lane. So maybe, I don't know. I'm just sort of thinking out loud. But maybe it's just, we're already laning, right? We're laning for Rosh Chodesh. That's an established halacha that we lane on Rosh Chodesh, and what we lane on Rosh Chodesh. There seems to be a mitzvah. I mean, I don't think. I think it's more than just a minhag. The fact that we are taking it a Sefer Torah and laning on Chanukah, it just seems to be an Ein Mashkichim beChanukah seems to mean it's not the Iker. It may still be a mitzvah, but it's not the Iker. And so maybe a better way to put this is, instead of saying Ain Maavirin mitzvahs, there's no mitzvah, there is a mitzvah, but it's not equal mitzvahs. So maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's that Ain Maavirin mitzvahs would be more relevant when you have two mitzvahs in front of you and they're both equal, right? One doesn't have more precedence than the other. One isn't a deraisa versus a drabanan, but the fact that the Gemara says that that Chanukah is not the Iker makes it on a lower level of mitzvah. Maybe again, I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud.
Maybe that's the same discussion, and that aligns much better with the